see a second major renewal of the middle class. And it's actually a fairly optimistic piece. I mean, I start out by pointing out that a lot of us are experiencing despair over the state of affairs in America. Women and queer people are being forced back into the kitchen and closet. Climate change is killing scores of Americans every week. Our schools and public areas are under constant assault by armed Republican gangs and Republican-sanctioned mass shooters. Over the past decade, more than 1 million lives have been lost to what are called deaths of despair as a result of our 40-year experiment with Reaganomics and neoliberalism. And it's not just domestic bad news coming out of the Republican Party's open opposition to democracy. After Trump betrayed Ukraine, Russia invaded that country. China is openly threatening a similar sort of war against Taiwan. I mean, there's a lot to be concerned about. But nonetheless, I'm actually quite hopeful right now. I think we're on the cusp of a new great turning of American history, a replay of the crisis into which Franklin Roosevelt stepped 4 generations ago, maybe 5, while revisiting many of the same solutions. And ironically, it's all coming about for many of the same reasons. I mean, let's just go through this. Compare 1933 to 2021. In 1933, the United States was in one of the worst moments, arguably the second worst crisis behind the Civil War in the history of the United States. You had climate change caused by human activity, particularly deforestation and unsustainable agricultural practices, was driving farmers off their land while throwing up 100-mile-long dust clouds from the Midwest to New York City. My old friend Dennis Weaver, who used to come on this program regularly too, but I knew Dennis from the 70s. And he wrote heartbreakingly in his autobiography, it's called All the World's a Stage. I wrote the foreword to his autobiography, by the way, Dennis Weaver's, about his family's escape in this broken down 1930s car out of Oklahoma from the Dust Bowl to come here to Oregon to be migrant farm workers. Dennis Weaver was a migrant farm worker as a child, during the Dust Bowl. So we had massive climate change back in 1933. Food prices were skyrocketing relative to income. I mean, generally prices were down, but income was down so much more. Homelessness was epidemic. Entire regions of the nation were being depopulated. Crime, fear, and despair stalked our nation. The 3 previous Republican presidents had cut taxes on the morbidly rich from 91% down to 25%, and they had deregulated Wall Street, throwing the nation into a depression so severe that fully a third of the country was unemployed and people were literally starving. The stock market crashed to lows with a speed not seen in living memory. Every bank in America had collapsed, the final few hundred, in the week before Franklin Roosevelt was sworn in. The nation was still reeling from a world war and a flu pandemic that had killed millions. Parents despaired that their children would never reach the standard of living they enjoyed. Half the country, it was not the middle class in 1933. Half the country lived in deep poverty. The morbidly rich had literally never had it so well. The preceding decade was called the Roaring '20s because wealthy people were lighting their cigars with $1,000 bills, and speculators and industrialists were in a wild competition over who could throw the most gaudy, expensive, and wasteful parties. Meanwhile, in 1933, when working people tried to organize unions, local police, right-wing militia gangs, and private security, people would attack with dogs, chains, and live ammunition. There were no laws protecting the right to unionize, so working people across the nation were routinely murdered for the crime of demanding a minimum wage. Minorities, from racial minorities to gays to Jews, fared even worse than working white people. Lynching had made a comeback. The Klan and hundreds of white citizens organizations affiliated were on the rise. Basically, no prosecutors in the country wanted to hold them to account because the local and state ordinances only protected wealthy white men. There were no federal laws against murder, and there were no federal laws against civil rights violations, so the federal government just kind of stayed out of it. Let the Klan run nuts in the states. Fascists were rallying in American cities, wearing swastika armbands and sporting Confederate flags, preaching this new form of government that had taken over Italy and Germany. It was called fascism. So many Republican politicians had taken to the floor of the U.S. House and Senate to praise Adolf Hitler and his new German system that Rex Stout, the most widely read author in America, compiled their speeches into a book called The Illustrious Dunderheads. My dad gave me a first edition copy for my birthday 5 decades ago. And across the Pacific, talk of war. Japan was undergoing a massive rearmament and talking about attacking China, which they ultimately did. Mussolini and Hitler were publicly imagining a world without democracies, unitary fascist world leadership. So into this maelstrom in 1933 steps a new president, Franklin Roosevelt. And in his inaugural speech, his first day in office in March of 1933, he steps up to the microphone and he says, "This is preeminently the time to speak the truth, the whole truth, frankly and boldly. Nor need we shrink from honestly facing conditions in our country today. This great nation will endure as it has endured. It will revive and prosper. So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance." So this is Franklin Roosevelt trying to deal with the wreckage of 12 years of Republican rule, 3 consecutive Republican governments, presidents, who deregulated everything, cut taxes on the rich, and crashed America. As he pointed out, it was not a happy talk speech. He went on to say stock values have shrunk to fantastic levels, taxes have risen, our ability to pay has fallen, governments of all kinds is faced by serious curtailment of income, the means of exchange are frozen in the currents of trade, the withered leaves of industrial enterprise lie on every side, farmers find no market for their produce, the savings of years in thousands of families are gone. More important, a host of unemployed citizens face the grim problem of existence and an equally great number toil with little return. He said, only a foolish optimist can deny the dark realities of the moment. And yet, in that moment, he galvanized the nation. The people were fully behind him. The New York Times did a huge piece about this. So what are the correlations between the times of 1933 and the times of right now that are causing me to make the argument that Joe Biden is this generation's Franklin Roosevelt, or at least has the potential to be, depending on what he can accomplish and whether Democrats can hold Congress this fall?